Hold on, let me think about that.
Yeah.
I do talk with my hands.
My mother went here, her father went here. Growing up, I saw the school as the best of the best. I didn't know the stories that were hidden in the walls around this campus.
You think of Harvard as this quintessential perfect place with ivy along the walls. But as you learn about its history, you think about some of the ugliness that went into building these buildings.
This history is all around us. In a way, we live in a landscape of enslavement.
The United States, for some time, has been focused on the issue of slavery and its legacies.
There's a sense of urgency to dealing with this now, partially because it should have been done in the past. We are at the point in which we have the opportunity to either carry with us the biases of the past or reimagine what our future worlds could look like.
In the case of Harvard, the obligation of the institution is to uncover that past and to come to terms with it.
Veritas is the motto of Harvard University. On our shield, the word is displayed across 3 open books, suggesting both our mission of education and the transparency that's demanded of us. Even when it's painful, we must face the truth.
It's time to document what actually is our legacy. We have to turn around and ask ourselves, what were we doing? Why were we doing it? What does it mean for who we are now?
People have this image of Harvard University being an ivory tower, as if it's separated from the world, as if it's above the world. But there's no separation from the world. There's no place outside history.
I started looking into the history at Harvard and slavery in 2007. I read a report written by a committee at Brown University about Brown's connection to slavery. I wondered if there is not a similar story to be told about Harvard.
The conventional story of slavery is about plantation slavery in the southern states. Even well-read people just don't know about the history of slavery in the North.
It's easy to say, well, Massachusetts is not in the South, that slavery was abolished very early, and so it couldn't have had that great of an impact on the institution. Earlier generations of Harvard leaders just thought it was better left unspoken and unexamined.
Well, I think a full accounting for Harvard's history has to begin with colonization in the Americas.
Many indigenous peoples lost their lives and lost their freedoms as a result of the encroachment of English settlers. Harvard University was built on and still exists on taken Native American lands.
The Charter of 1650, which still governs Harvard, called for the education of English and Indian youth. And yet in the 17th century, many indigenous Americans were enslaved, and Harvard only gave a degree to 1 native student. So we have this tension between the principles that Harvard has espoused and the practices that it's followed.
The truth is that the university drew in all kinds of ways on the labor of enslaved people.
We've uncovered that more than 70 people, 70 human beings, were owned by Harvard leadership, faculty, staff, from the founding of the university through 1783, when slavery was made unlawful in Massachusetts.
The evidence of the legacy of slavery at Harvard is in the landscape. you can go to the old burial ground and you can see the headstones for 2 enslaved people. One of them, a girl named Cicely, was enslaved to William Brattle, who was a tutor, a treasurer, and a fellow at Harvard University.
We also know that several of Harvard's presidents who lived in Wadsworth House, which is still standing on campus today, owned enslaved people of African origins, among them Venus, Bila, and Juba.
Titus also is someone who was enslaved on Harvard's campus, and he is believed to have been of indigenous and possibly also of African descent.
That was a thing that people did. They bring their, what they would call servants, but they would, in many instances, be enslaved people. Those enslaved people supported Harvard presidents. They fed Harvard students. They were a part of daily life at Harvard.
But this is just a small part of our story of how we are involved with the institution of slavery.
The New England economy was very much tied to slavery in the South and slavery in the Caribbean as well. That's really the Harvard story.
In the 17th and 18th centuries, Boston was a kind of economic suburb of the Caribbean. New Englanders who had the resources would move to the Caribbean, invest in the plantation sector, and strike it rich.
That wealth can be clearly seen in an 18th century plantation house still standing just a couple of miles from Harvard's campus. This was the home of the Royals, Isaac Royal Sr. and his son Isaac Royal Jr.
The Royals are a good example of Harvard's entanglement with the institution of slavery.
The Royals made their money off sugar plantations in the island of Antigua, but it wasn't easy money.
In 1736, Antigua's plantation owners became fearful that enslaved workers were plotting against them, and they decided to crack down.
The royal family was involved in putting down this slave uprising. A lot of head chopping, decapitations to make people as examples, burning people.
Then Isaac Royal Sr. migrated back to New England, to his huge property, several hundred acres of land. He brought enslaved workers from the Caribbean to Medford to work. Eventually, Isaac Royal Jr. donates lands to Harvard University, which the university then sells and uses to endow the first professorship of law at Harvard University.
And some people take that as the founding of the Harvard Law School.
So in many ways, the origins of one of the world's greatest law schools, namely Harvard Law School, is directly to be found in the exploitation of enslaved workers on the sugar plantations of Antigua. But we cannot think of these donations only as something that happened a long time ago.
Isaac Royal made his money in the 18th century, and yet Harvard Law School in the 21st century still has an Isaac Royal chair named for that original gift.
And Isaac Royal was just one of many donors to the university who made their money, at least in part through slavery and the slave trade.
Their gifts allowed the university to add buildings, infrastructure, to hire faculty, expand the student body. So in a real way, the proceeds from slavery helped Harvard become the Harvard we know today.
So money derived from slave labor contributed to Harvard. But Harvard also produced and advanced some of the racist ideas that underpinned the system of slavery and justified segregation and racial subjugation long after slavery ended.
One of the most influential race scientists at Harvard was a man named Louis Agassiz.
Louis Agassiz came to Harvard in 1847 from Switzerland, where he had made a reputation for himself as a person studying comparative anatomy. A major question at the time was, how do we understand human variation? How do we understand that some groups have dark skin, some groups have lighter skin?
Agassiz becomes one of the major progenitors of the theory of polygenesis, the notion that human races are actually separate species, and God, rather than creating humanity in one moment, i.e. Adam and Eve, created 5 different Adam and Eves.
Agassiz argued that there were major anatomical, physiological, intellectual differences between human groups, that white Americans/Europeans were at the top of a hierarchy, and Africans, dark-skinned, black-skinned peoples were at the bottom.
The story of Stormont, of a black man from Southern Africa, reminds us of how tragedy was at the bottom of racial science.
It's such a horrible story. 2 American men went to Southern Africa. They ended up bringing back 5 men from different tribes here to Boston, having them displayed, dressed in quote-unquote native garb. Come and see these interesting, very, very different people.
These 5 men are put on display at the Aquarial Gardens. They were supposed to hold their spears and beads and sing songs for gawking audience members.
Among these men was a young man whose name we now pronounce Stormont.
Stormont is a particularly tragic figure. He's only 17 years old. At the end of about 6 months to a year of being on display, he takes his own life. He hangs himself. But Stormont's tragedy doesn't end with his death. When Stormont kills himself, they give his body to Harvard.
Harvard faculty member Jeffries Wyman conducted a dissection of Stormont's body, and they also made a set of casts of his body that remains in the Harvard Peabody Museum collections.
His skeleton is turned into a teaching tool. They say it's left in the care, what irony, of Professor Louis Agassiz. Stormont is measured and put in a linear position anatomically between whites and great apes. So not only is his body being destroyed, he's also being turned into this point of data to prove his own inferiority.
Once you start saying that there are fundamental and innate differences between human groups, which is what Agassiz argued, that provides a justification for slavery. And it played a major role in the ways in which inequality became so deeply embedded in American society. For white students here at Harvard, those ideas serve as a context in which they can say, we can't be in the same room and study with these people who are not our equals.
In 1850, when Harvard Medical School takes its first attempt at desegregating, Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., the father of the famous Supreme Court Justice, had been the professor of anatomy at Harvard for 3 years and was then the dean of the medical school.
3 African-American men were admitted to the medical school.
The famous abolitionist Martin Delany, and then 2 local students, David Lang Jr. and Isaac H. Snowden.
White Harvard Medical School students were in an uproar about the presence of these black men in their classes.
They protested. They wrote a rageful letter threatening to leave the university if the students were admitted.
Wendell Holmes succumbed to the pressure. Those students, those black men, were expelled from Harvard Medical School. And for many years, well into the 20th century, the number of African American students studying at Harvard Medical School remained smaller than many other medical schools in this country.
The expulsions were because of pushback from students and faculty and some alumni. At the same time, there were students who wrote letters. They raised their voices. They said that it was wrong to expel those students.
there's a through line there that every time there has been a legacy of racism, a legacy of slavery, a legacy of domination, there is also a legacy of resistance. I would even call it a tradition of resistance that runs through Harvard as well.
People like Charles Hamilton Houston, Eva Beatrice Dykes, and W.B. Du Bois, who of course is a towering intellect, who is a co-founder of the Niagara movement, which becomes the NAACP.
Du Bois was the first African American to earn a PhD from Harvard, but he did not feel that he was particularly welcomed in the Harvard community.
It was, to some degree, a lonely existence for Du Bois. He famously said that he was in Harvard, but not of it. And yet, he and many others in Harvard's history, having experienced discrimination and exclusion, made invaluable contributions that led to the remaking of America, that led to the fall of Jim Crow, to the passage of the Civil Rights Act, to the Voting Rights Act. The history of Harvard is entangled with change-making in this country, and so the history and the counter-history are all bound up together.
So what do when you discover the institution has a dark past? That its history is not just heroic, but it's also ironic and tragic.
I think there's a natural inclination not to confront ugly things. Somebody who's uncomfortable, I would say, you don't have the luxury of comfort in every situation.
If you are of a marginalized community, we live in a space of discomfort. And so what we're asking is for people of dominant culture to live in this discomfort with us.
One thing I would want to stress for people is that it is not your fault slavery happened, but by virtue of attending this university, it is our duty to bring light to those injustices.
Reckoning with history means that we look with eyes wide open at the layers of experience, often painful layers of experience that undergird this place.
The process that we're all being invited into is to not think of this as just Black history or just about slavery. It's about us as much as it is about a legacy.
In the past few years, we have begun to take some small steps to engage this history, to grapple with how we can address some of the damages that we have done.
One of the first ways that people reckon with this history is they want to change or rearrange the symbolic landscape.
The royal family crest was 3 sheaves of wheat. And in the 1930s, Harvard decided to use the royal family crest for the law school because of their connection to the law school.
When students learned this, they protested it.
So the law school made a committee. I was on the committee, and Bruce Mann was the chair of the committee. And we came to the conclusion that the shield should be withdrawn. I was a dissenter in that.
Professor Annette Gordon-Reed believes quite powerfully, quite persuasively, that we need symbols to remind us.
My concern was I did not want this story to be forgotten. That was my thinking. It would be important to keep this alive, to make Harvard's ties to this something that they couldn't walk away from.
The important thing with Isaac Royal, when people think, oh, you're just judging a man of the 18th century by 21st century standards, no, that's not it at all. The question for us was whether a man of the 18th century should represent the Harvard Law School of the 21st century.
So you put up a plaque, you replace a shield, but that's just the beginning of the process. A real reckoning, a real taking responsibility for this history is to think about how we apply ourselves to the future.
Harvard University has a deep history. We as an institution are engaging with that history. because it's in that search that we discover as a community who we are.
If Harvard does not continue its process of reckoning, that sends a message that that is something that can be researched, written about, relegated to a drawer somewhere, and then, we did it. Let's move on.
Slavery is a sin that can never be undone. One of the fundamental truths that our community needs to confront is that the effects of slavery endure today.
The key is not to hide it. And the whole initiative about looking at slavery, looking at the ties to slavery is about veritas. It's about truth.
In this reckoning, it requires more than just an acknowledgement of history, but also a commitment to the future as well. The task of right now is figuring out how to turn that into practice.
The report and recommendations are just a beginning. If Harvard was not a leader years ago on the issue of racial inequality, it can be a leader today.
The Legacy of Slavery project is as powerful as we allow it to be. Let's let it be powerful.